One of the most insidious human weaknesses is our tendency to lose sight of the forest for the trees. People will blind themselves to the big picture, the big goal, in pursuit of comparatively trivial optimizations. We're seeing some Cardano stake pool operators doing that right now. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss some of the not so surprising results so far out of the Cardano Foundation's SPO poll, some reactions to the recent pro-crypto bill in the U.S. House of Representatives, and a very anti-crypto remark out of the White House. If you seldomly find yourself sitting outside in a pile of dirty fiat, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Okay, guys, we are going to talk about this losing sight of the forest for the trees phenomenon that is happening right now in Cardano in this SPO poll. And it's pretty much exactly as expected. There are some enlightened SPOs who are voting altruistically because they see the forest. They understand the big goal, the big picture here is making the Cardano ecosystem as valuable as possible. How do we make the Cardano ecosystem as valuable as possible? By making it as decentralized as possible. If we're not decentralized, we're just a bad version of Visa, a bad version of MasterCard. If we're decentralized, we're something very, very different than any of those legacy institutions. And this applies to a lot of different use cases for a lot of different reasons, which we've talked about ad nauseum on this channel. It's basically the only thing we've ever talked about on this channel. But decentralization is the thing that will make the Cardano ecosystem very valuable. That's the forest. That's the big picture. That's the big goal that everybody needs to see. Everybody won't see that. We know these are human beings we're talking about here. Human beings often do not see the forest. Why? Because they're too focused on the trees. And for stake pool operators, those trees are basically monthly income. It's basically income at the epic level or at the monthly level, but it's their income from their stake pool. What do humans do? What do humans do when it comes to revenue and earnings? They often make the mistake of thinking short term. And that's what a lot of stake pool operators are doing in this poll. They'll tell you a million reasons why it's not the money. The reason they're voting, it's kind of interesting and hilarious. If you go through Cardano Twitter right now, you'll find stake pool operators explaining a million reasons why they're voting the way they are. And nobody says it's the money. Almost nobody mentions money. And the ones who are doing the most explaining are the ones not voting for this option. This option, increase K to 1,000 and have min pool cost to 170. The stake pool is voting for this option. They're not really explaining much because everybody already knows why they're voting this way. They're voting this way because it's a vote for decentralization. The stake pool is doing all the explaining. They're usually voting for one of these other three options. And that's because in most of the cases, as I'm about to show you, in most of the cases, it looks like they're just voting in favor of their own pocketbook, which is what we expect from humans. Humans are going to think short term. Humans have a really hard time thinking long term. And making the Cardano ecosystem as valuable as possible is a long-term play. That's long-term thinking. That's a great long-term idea. But they're not thinking about that. Humans like to think short term. They're thinking about their stake pool operator earnings on something more like a monthly basis, on an every 5 days basis, something like that. And it becomes really obvious that that's what's going on when we break down how this vote is going. So I'm going to use these AdaStat numbers. And if you can see, the numbers show up like this. The numbers look like this. And, we get numbers like 5.32 million, and there's an ADA symbol in there, and the whole number's not spelled out. But earlier today, and this is going to be, several hours old, quite a few hours old, but earlier today, I took all these numbers, expanded them out, categorized them by the vote, and did a few things with these numbers. Okay, here's the big spreadsheet. And we're going to go through the 4 big options. We're not going to cover the other 2 options, which were abstain or none, as in I don't like any of the options. We're not going to cover those 2 because there's no data to help us there. But with these big 4 options, there are some insights to be garnered. Here's what I mean. So here's the first option, K equals 500. So they don't want to change the saturation threshold for the pools. They want to stay at K equals 500, and they don't want to change the min pool cost, which we've talked about a lot recently. So they want everything to stay the same. I wonder who voted for this one. It turns out when we break it down, and this was as of, several hours ago, so the numbers have changed slightly, but not by much. This was by stake. This was 84.73% multi-poolers. It was almost 85% by stake of this vote from multi-poolers. It wasn't anybody but the multi-poolers. A very small amount of stake voted for this that wasn't multi-pooler stake. The rest of it, all multi-poolers. So we know who voted for this option. Change nothing. The multi-poolers, they love this option because they're making plenty of money on the min pool cost. So they want to keep it here. Not all of them are making plenty of money, but their best way to make money as a multi-pooler, min pool cost. I mean, they're usually making more money on the margin, but the min pool cost is such a huge portion of the money they're making. They don't want to change anything there. So then we come to the next option. Also keep the saturation threshold where it is, but cut the min pool cost in half. So if you keep the saturation threshold where it is, that means that saturation is still going to be at this amount over 70 million. If we go to K equals 1,000, the saturation level goes down to, right now it would go down to around 35 million. So who voted for this one? Turns out 70% of the stake voting for this one was large stake pools. Stake pools over 35 million. Why would they vote for this? Because if we go to K equals 500, they have to lose some delegators. They're going to be over saturation, and delegators are going to flee until they're under that 35 million level. So as you go through this, you can see a lot of stake pools, with like over 60 million delegation, over 50 million delegation, over 70 million delegation. They're going to lose a lot of delegators, which means they lose money. So 70% of the vote for this one was stake pools over 35 million in delegation. So above what the saturation threshold would be. That was 70% of the stake voting for this option. We come down here. This next option is K equals 1,000. So do cut the saturation threshold. Go down to a saturation threshold of, right now it would be around 35 million as opposed to the, above 70 million it is right now, but keep the min pool cost. So don't change anything with min pool cost, but change it to saturation level. Again, it's like, who voted for this one? You can see by my red marks there. If you saw who was involved with the red marks up above, you already know what the answer to this is. This was by stake 64.54% multi-poolers. So again, most of this is just multi-poolers. And, as you'd expect, if you look at these numbers, the ones in red are all the multi-poolers. You notice they're largely multi-poolers under 35 million. So they're happy to go to K equals 1,000 because their pools are, largely under 35 million. But do they want to cut that min cost? Nope. They're just voting straight pocketbook. They're just voting for their pocketbooks here. And there are exceptions. I'm not saying every single one is voting for their pocketbook, but it's a gigantic portion. I mean, if you can see, is there a single one over 30? Okay, there's one over 35 million, but it's just barely over 35 million. So it's mainly multi-poolers, and every single one of the pools involved is under 35 million, except for that one. So you can see this directly lines up with their incentives. We come to the final option, which is, go ahead and cut the saturation level and go ahead and cut the min pool cost. So this, to me, is a vote for decentralization. And what do we see here? If we go through this whole list, we see, a few red votes, and they're one of the stake pools we've already talked about. That is Rick McCracken's Digital Fortress stake pool. He is one of the few multi-poolers who voted for this option. Another one is the Cool stake pool. Cool stake pool, though, seems to have votes in for every option. It seems like they have multiple pools, and different of their pools voted for different options. So I don't think I understand what their strategy is there. But the other one that voted in favor, the other multi-pooler that voted in favor of this option was Titan. So we've really got Titan and Digi voting in favor of this option that I think is the one that leads to the most decentralization. And we've got Cool, but Cool voted for multiple options. So in my opinion, they don't really count. It's mainly just Digi and Titan. And guess what? They are only 15%. The multi-poolers voting for this option, which is the cut the saturation threshold and cut the min pool cost, only make up 15% of the vote for this option. So 15.6% of multi-poolers voted for this option. If we come back to the options that keep the min pool cost, again, we saw 65% of the vote is coming from multi-poolers. If we go back up to this one that changes nothing, including the min pool cost, it's 85% of multi-poolers. So aside from Digi and Titan, the multi-poolers are voting their checkbooks. They're voting their pocketbooks. They're voting keep the min pool cost. So very commendable to both Titan and Digi. Also interesting, remember, this is not just to have the min pool cost. This final decentralization option was to go to K equals 1,000, which cuts the saturation level. You notice only 30.5% of the stake, 30.57% of the stake voting for this option was over 35 million. So only a third of the stake was over the saturation threshold. And if we go back here, remember, we have these other options. This was one, K equals 500. We had 70% of the vote coming from those over 35 million. Here's another one. We didn't count for this one, but for this one, 70% was over 35 million. This one, you can kind of look at the pool. You can kind of look at the pools here and see the size of those pools. But overwhelmingly, what we have is that large stake pools overwhelmingly voted to stay at K equals 500. Multi-pools overwhelmingly voted not to cut the min pool cost. Everybody's just voting in favor of their pocketbooks. Not everybody. There are these exceptions, these altruistic exceptions. We have some pools over 35 million voting for K equals 1,000. We have some min poolers voting for cutting the min pool cost. We do have some altruistic examples, but again, human beings, they pretty much vote in favor of their own economic self-interest. I would offer that this is an example of losing sight of the forest for the trees. The best way for them to serve their own economic self-interest is actually to make the Cardano ecosystem as valuable as possible, because their earnings are denominated in ADA. They want that ADA to be as valuable as possible. That's the way to make their membership in the Cardano ecosystem the most valuable, but it's long-term. It's a little bit longer term than how much money am I going to make on my stake pool in Q3, because what we're talking about here are changes that could possibly take effect in Q3. So they're all worried about what's going to happen in just a few months. They're worried about their stake pool earnings, but that's the short-term optimization. I believe their economic self-interest is better served by the longer-term optimization of making Cardano as decentralized as possible and making the Cardano ecosystem as valuable as possible because of that decentralization. That's what they should be thinking about. But these are human beings, and instead they're thinking about short-term economic gains. You'll remember this bill we talked about last week coming from Representatives Tom Emmer and Darren Soto. Tom Emmer is a Republican and Darren Soto is a Democrat. This is a bipartisan bill, and it does something very interesting for crypto. Very kind of ingenious and simple. So we've talked many times in the past about how the 33 Act has this Section 2A1 that's a laundry list of securities, and one of the items on that long list is the phrase investment contract, and this is what the whole Howey case is all about. So this bill does something really interesting. It says, hey, let's add something at the end of that list, section 2A1, that says the term security does not include an investment contract asset. And then they're going to define that. They're going to say an investment contract asset means an asset that could be digital, that could be tangible or intangible, that is not otherwise a security pursuant to that laundry list. So if you've got crypto and it's only a security, if it's possibly only a security because it's an investment contract is on that list, and we've got all the Howey case law, if that's the only reason that a crypto asset is a security, then we're just going to go ahead and say it is not a security. This is kind of an ingenious way to get crypto out of that whole Howey case law regime that is so incredibly broad. The way Howey's written, it's so incredibly broad that we've got an SEC like the current SEC that just says all of crypto, they're all securities basically. They can basically make a case that any asset in crypto is a security. This bill solves that problem, or it purports, it attempts to solve that problem. And Representative Emmer is reporting back on some of the feedback he's been getting, at least from the crypto crowd. Jerry Brito of Coin Center, who we've talked about in the past, had this to say: "This is the smartest approach we've seen to provide clarity about how securities law applies to digital assets." Kirsten Smith of the Blockchain Association said, "Industry needs clear rules of the road so that companies can afford products that can offer products that consumers want while maintaining consumer protections. We are proud to support the reintroduction of the Securities Clarity Act." Sheila Warren of the Crypto Council for Innovation said, we commend Representative Tom Emmer and Representative Darren Soto for their commitment to American innovation with the reintroduction of this important bipartisan legislation, which makes clear the distinction between an investment contract and the underlying asset or token. So we've got kind of like a broad swath of the crypto lobbying organizations or other organizations active in Washington, however these groups are branding themselves. And I think it's because this bill is kind of ingenious in its simplicity, just to sort of opt crypto out of being a security right from go in that Section 2A laundry list of securities. And it's also bipartisan. A lot of people like to sort of frame the crypto issue as a partisan issue. One party's for it, one party's against it. But we have a lot of really good examples on sort of both sides of the aisle of people who are very much in favor of crypto. And it's really just the current administration and a few politicians like the Dragon and a few heads of, regulatory or other agencies like Gensler and Yellen who are very, very much against crypto. And I think once that administration is no longer there, we might see that this isn't as much a partisan issue as the current administration is trying to make it out to be. Finally, if you have any doubt in your mind how much the current administration wants to market itself as an anti-crypto administration, check this out. This is Biden at the G7 summit in Japan.
"I'm not going to agree to a deal that protects wealthy tax cheats and crypto traders while putting food assistance at risk for nearly 1 million Americans. And it's time."
That was completely gratuitous. He didn't have to include crypto in this. And to be fair, this was kind of a back and forth thing. They had this whole script written for him where he was going back and forth, like the current debt ceiling deal does this, but it takes away this. It gives this, but it takes away this. That whole ping pong back and forth thing they love to do so much. But they just gratuitously included crypto. When you've got a candidate who is this, let's say, of a certain age, when you got a candidate of a certain age, and when there are so many questions about his cognitive abilities, you should be doing everything you can to connect with younger generations and, more tech-oriented generations and more tech-oriented segments of the population. And instead, what they do is just gratuitously call out crypto over and over and over again. I don't think there's going to be any change to this. I think this only changes if this administration changes, but I hope you had a great weekend, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.